In this video, we're going to talk about vertical shift. So far, we saw how the A, B, and C affected the sinusoidal functions. Now, what about D? How does D affect the graph of sinusoidal functions? Let's compare sine of x and sine of x plus 1. Here, the D is positive 1. So let's graph this. So we have a sine x, and this is sine x plus 1. What happened? Everything moved up 1. Here's a midline of sine x, and the midline of sine of x plus 1 became y equals 1. And notice everything moved up 1. Now, what about sine of x minus 1? Let's see what happens to this compared to sine of x. So when d is negative 1, everything moves down 1 compared to sine of x. So d causes vertical shift. So let's say you want to graph g of x equals cosine of x plus 2 without the graphing calculator. What would you do? First, you probably want to graph cosine of x. And that's pretty simple to do. Amplitude is 1. So you go all the way up to 1 and go down to negative 1. Period is 2 pi. So 0, pi over 2, pi, 3 pi over 2, and 2 pi. So this is the midline. So you start from the top, middle, bottom, middle, top. That's one cycle. So that's a one cycle of cosine of x. Now, in order to graph cosine of x plus 2, everything will move up 2. So the midline, which is y equals 0, will end up at y equals 2. And this top, 0, 1, will become 0, 3. And this point will end up over here. That point will end up over here. This point will end up over here. And that point will end up over here. So since d is 2, compared to cosine of x, this graph will move up 2. And there's one cycle of cosine of x plus 2. So d causes vertical shift. If d is positive, everything will move up. If d is negative, everything will move down. So if you want to graph this without the calculator, first, what is A? A is 1, B is also 1, C is 2 pi, and D is negative 1. So what is the amplitude? Amplitude is absolute value of A, which is going to be absolute value of 1, and that is 1. What about period? Period is 2 pi over absolute value of B. In this case, it's going to be 2 pi over absolute value of 1, which is 2 pi. What about phase shift? That's going to be negative C over absolute value of B, which is negative 2 pi over absolute value of 1, which is negative 2 pi. Now, finally, what is a vertical shift? That's going to be negative 1. So in order to graph this, you probably first want to graph sine of quantity x plus 2 pi, and then you need to bring down everything by 1 to get this final graph. Now, in order to graph sine of x plus 2 pi, you first want to sketch sine of x. So sine of x has a period of 2 pi. So that's pi over 2, pi, 3 pi over 2, and 2 pi. So you start from the middle, go top, middle, bottom, and then middle. So this graph is sine of x. However, sine of quantity x plus 2 pi will have a phase shift. Since phase shift is negative, everything is going to move to the left. So it's going to be 0 minus 2 pi, which is negative 2 pi, pi over 2 minus 2 pi, which is negative 3 pi over 2, pi minus 2 pi, which is going to be negative pi, and then 3 pi over 2 minus 2 pi, which is negative pi over 2. And finally, we have 2 pi minus 2 pi, which is going to be 0. So let's draw a line here. You got negative pi over 2. You got negative pi, negative 3 pi over 2, and then negative 2 pi. So this point will end up over here. And that point will end up over here. This point will end up over here. This point will end up over here. And that point will end up over here. So this will be sine of x plus 2 pi after phase shift. Now, everything's going to move down 1 because the vertical shift is negative 1. So you have negative 2. So the midline will become y equals negative 1. So this point will end up over here. That point will end up over here. This point will end up over here. And that point will end up over here. And this point will end up over here. Again, we only drew one cycle, but you know that this graph will go on continuously. So this is the graph of y equals sine of quantity x plus 2 pi minus 1.